Today, I wanted to talk about Chris Paul and the Warriors. I did a follow-up video talking about Jordan Poole and the Wizards, just with some more expanded thoughts from when I reacted to the Chris Paul trade initially. But as I said with the Jordan Poole video at the time, I really wanted to expound on further ideas that I had about it. And for me, specifically with Chris Paul and the Warriors, it's kind of interesting, kind of weird to imagine him within that system, because it seems like kind of a clash to his play style, but at the same time, a clash that might be necessary, not even might be, definitely is necessary as Chris Paul gets older and not as good. Hello everybody, welcome to Oscar Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second. It makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Chris Paul throughout his career has obviously been a heavy ball handler, a very consistently dribbling all the time. It was something that he wanted to do less of, which was in part why he went to Houston, so that James Harden could do a lot of that. And as he's gotten older, of course, his actual responsibilities for creating offense off of the dribble has diminished. Throughout his career, while Chris has been a capable off-ball player, no doubt, it's not necessarily been like something that he's known for. And it is interesting to imagine what exactly the balance is going to be in terms of how much is Chris dribbling versus how much is he playing with that Warrior system. The Warrior system that kind of exists in a way that kind of negates dribbling the air out of the ball. Chris has done that much less than he was doing in his prime, but still something that he does, and still something that's a very prominent part of his game, and still something that I feel like if you remove that from the equation, you're kind of asking to lose some impact from him. Like if you have Chris Paul and you're not going to have Chris Paul run pick and roll, if you're not going to have Chris Paul, take these mid-range pull-ups on the elbow, what's the point of even having Chris Paul at this point, especially given the fact that his three ball has been pretty wildly inconsistent. It was really bad, really inconsistent for them in the playoffs. For the first half of this season, I believe it was, he shot like 28% from three. He completely flipped the script the second half of the season and was knocking them down. So, I'm not suggesting that he's a bad three-point shooter by any stretch, but the reliability on that shot, the confidence in that shot, it's been a little bit wavering the past two seasons. And actually, I believe 2 seasons ago, he shot like 21 or 31% from three. Sorry, not 21. 21's a lot worse. That's the first thing that comes to mind, is how is Chris going to fit in terms of his play style clashing with the Warriors system. The next thing that's really interesting is, what does this Warriors system look like with another playmaker on the floor? Generally, for the Warriors, at least with their starting lineup, you're only really worrying about Draymond or Steph making plays. I mean, don't get me wrong, other players on the team are capable of making passes, but those are the guys who are leading the assisting of the team. Now you have a third guy out there who is really just as capable of diming people up, and no one on that level as a playmaker has ever been on this team with those two. I think the next best playmaker that's been on the team, I guess Iggy, I don't know, is he returning to the team? I can't even remember. But Andre Iguodala could do some secondary playmaking a decent bit. Maybe Sean Livingston a little bit, but even then, those guys were primarily in their offensive role, just finishing plays rather than creating them. So there's that balance with Chris, where it's like, how much is he going to be creating plays versus finishing them? And how is that system going to handle having yet another guy who can make those plays? And that can go both directions. It can be positive, where it's like another guy with excellent decision-making skills that can make really difficult passes. That is a net positive in a way, but if he's doing it too much, or it's interrupting the flow of that Warriors offense, well, then that's not a good thing. And it's a balance that has to be struck with this team, and I'm not sure how that's going to go, and I imagine there's going to be a lot of growing pains. It's going to be very weird for sure for quite a while. I'm not the first person to say this by any any means. But it's very weird to even think about the fact that Chris Paul is on this team to begin with. It's weird to imagine him in a Warriors jersey. It's weird to imagine him as a backup because there's a very real chance he is a backup. I know that's been a topic of discussion. I do think a Warriors lineup with Steph at the 2, Chris at the 1, going small, Draymond at the 5, all that is a conceivably interesting lineup that could do very good things. However, I definitely wouldn't go with that as like the starters. I wouldn't put it on Draymond Green at his age to be a full-time starting center. I think Chris could just be a part of the new, ever-expanding, always changing death lineup. It's kind of every year what the death lineup has changed. It started with Draymond at the 5 and Iggy in the game. Then it became Draymond at the 5, Kevin Durant in the game. Maybe this new death lineup is Draymond at the 5, Chris Paul in the game. And when you have that lineup out there, you have a ton of playmaking. Chris Paul should hopefully hold up enough as a shooter. I mean, it definitely has potential to be a very dynamic and scary offense to have to face. Defensively speaking, Chris Paul is like smart, which is important. And I think the Warriors defense is strong enough that just him simply being smart and being in the right place at the right time will prevent him from being particularly exploited. Maybe more so that would be a worry in a playoff setting. I mean, it definitely would be more so a worry there. But overall, I think he should be fine defensively. And then I think finishing plays wise, off ball wise, again, should be fine. I don't expect him to excel in these areas, but hopefully not a hindrance. My only concern would just be that maybe there's times where he tries to do too much, not because he's necessarily incapable of doing those things, but just because it's kind of the instinct of a version of Chris Paul that was more capable. That said, I do think what would be best for him would be for him to kind of be the guy who is carrying the offense whenever Steph is not on the floor. Let him, historically the Warriors are always like pretty questionable whenever Steph is not on the floor, other than the Kevin Durant years, because they would have Kevin Durant on the floor without him. But yeah, I think that's where he could make his presence most felt. That's where he can impact the winning the most, is in the, I guess 14 minutes or whatever that Steph isn't in the game. If he can just be, a pretty damn good version of Chris Paul, still like a 13.8 assist type of guy, that would help their offense quite a bit. I do worry that his lack of rim pressure, and this last year his mid-range volume was significantly lower just because he's not really that aggressive anymore. I do worry that maybe because he's just not as much of a threat of a scorer, ultimately that playmaking will be negated. That's just kind of what exists between the relationship between scoring and playmaking. I think one of the main reasons Chris Paul is one of the best playmakers of all time is because he was also capable of scoring 30 points kind of whenever he wanted to. He's very much not capable of doing that whenever he wants to now. So I do worry about how much his playmaking will actually be that impactful. I do worry about what he can do off of the ball, but ultimately I do think he can hopefully, again, fill that gap when Steph is off of the floor to make the Warriors at least, 50% better than they would normally be in those minutes. And that difference can make a real difference in the win column, and it can make a real difference in terms of going far in the postseason. Surviving the non-Steph minutes for the Warriors is consistently a thing that they have to concern themselves with. I remember in the Kings series last year, it felt like anytime Steph got off of the floor, the Kings would go on a run. That's something that you're going to want to avoid, and hopefully Chris Paul could help you avoid that a little bit better. So yeah, there's just some thoughts on it. Ultimately, no matter how good it may or may not be, it will be very weird to see Chris Paul in a Warriors jersey, to be sure. But yeah, that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.